The ocean had swallowed the entire earth. But my boots were perfectly dry, standing on a fist-sized patch of dirt. Want to know how I built a continent from a single grain of sand? Because if the 50 desperate girls starving behind me found out I was running out of mana, they would throw me to the leviathans to buy themselves 10 seconds. By the end of this story, you'll understand why the most terrifying predator in a flooded world isn't the water, it's the landmaker. 3 days ago, the blue sky shattered. The Great Deluge wasn't a storm. It was an eviction notice for humanity. I survived because I secured a fiberglass lifeboat from a research vessel. Hours later, I found the debris of a luxury cruise ship floating on the waves. Clinging to the wreckage were 50 women. Heiresses, maids, influencers. The freezing saltwater equalized them all. Pulled them aboard. First mistake. Did I think I was playing the hero? No. Did I harbor some ridiculous fantasy about ruling a harem? Definitely not. I just didn't want to die alone. The lifeboat was rated for 20 passengers. 51 bodies made it a coffin. The hull sank dangerously low, the gunnels resting inches above the waterline. Whenever someone shifted, freezing ocean spilled over the sides, provoking shrieks of panic. The cold manifested as a physical weight pressing against my ribs. I sat near the bow, staring at the gray horizon. No rescue helicopters chopped through the clouds. The radio had been dead for 72 hours. Hunger acted like a slow poison, but thirst remained the knife at our throats. The briny air cracked our lips. A few survivors were already gazing at the dark depths, fighting the temptation to drink the sea. I needed a permanent solution. Gazing down at my bruised palms, I focused my mind. A faint, holographic interface hummed to life just above my skin, casting a pale blue glow over my knuckles. The system had awakened the moment the old world drowned. Skill absolute terraformation level 1. I could theoretically convert magical energy into solid matter, specifically earth. I leaned over the edge of the overloaded raft and plunged my bare hands into the freezing abyss. The water boiled. A dense chunk of coarse, gray granite materialized beneath the center of our fragile vessel. The boat lurched violently upward, groaning in structural protest as the sudden stone displaced the ocean. Dozens of girls screamed in terror, scrambling desperately away from the unnatural intrusion of solid ground. The rock measured barely 3 feet across, but it offered a terrifying amount of stability. The physical toll hit me instantly. I collapsed onto my knees, gasping for air. The sudden mana drain felt as though a frozen iron spike had been driven through my skull, siphoning the warmth from my bone marrow. My vision blurred at the edges. "What did you just do?" a sharp voice demanded. "I made a rock," I muttered, tasting copper on my tongue. "You have magic, you can save us." "I can barely save myself." It was Eleanor. Before the apocalypse, she was a tech billionaire's daughter. Now, she stood shivering in a ruined designer dress, still desperately clinging to her former authority. I ignored her demanding glare, keeping my eyes fixed on the glowing prompt hovering in my peripheral vision. The magic wasn't a simple transaction of energy for mass. A secondary condition flickered in deep crimson font at the bottom of the screen. What exactly was this mysterious system extracting from my body to build this rocky foundation? I didn't know it yet, but that bloody red text would eventually force me to decide who lived and who drowned. The true power I sought wasn't hidden within the stone itself, but in the ruthless leverage it provided. I wiped a trail of crimson from my nose. Synthesizing that tiny slab of granite had consumed a frightening fraction of my core vitality. If I kept constructing terrain, I would eventually wither into a hollow husk. But if I refused to build, the waves would claim us all. The survivors stared at the gray rock, then slowly shifted their collective gaze to me. The social dynamic fractured and rebuilt itself in a single heartbeat. I was no longer just the weary guy who dragged them from the tide. I had become the sole architect of the rarest commodity on a drowned planet dryland. For a fleeting second, I genuinely thought we had reached a silent understanding. The newfound stability delivered a brief, intoxicating wave of relief. A couple of women even began weeping tears of profound gratitude. Then, the black water surrounding our sanctuary began to churn. The ocean surface bubbled, shifting into a sickly, fluorescent green foam. A massive shadow expanded beneath the waves, effortlessly dwarfing our meager lifeboat. It certainly wasn't a stray shark. The tutorial interface had warned me about the leviathans, but casually reading floating text offered no preparation for the crushing aura of an apex predator rising from the abyss. The monster breached the surface. It resembled a mutated, prehistoric mosasaur, armored in scales as jagged as broken obsidian. Sheets of seawater cascaded off its monstrous snout. It unleashed a deafening roar, a concussive sound wave that vibrated against my teeth and rattled my aching ribs. Panic exploded. The girls scattered like frightened insects, pushing aggressively against one another, nearly capsizing the boat all over again. I clutched my cheap pocket knife, feeling profoundly ridiculous. How do you execute a giant sea monster with a 3-inch blade? You don't. How do you survive the encounter? You forcefully change the battlefield. Wait, let me rewind, because I missed a crucial detail right before the beast attacked. When I summoned the first rock, the system interface flashed a hidden diagnostic screen. It wasn't just measuring my mana depletion. The glowing text briefly scanned the 50 terrified women huddled around me, categorized their panicked emotional states, and calculated a bizarre metric labeled harvest efficiency. Why did the system classify these starving survivors not as allies, but as available biomass? The colossal jaws snapped shut, violently crushing the space where our lifeboat had floated mere seconds prior. I hadn't moved the boat. I had moved the rock beneath it. Driving my hands against the rough granite, I desperately funneled another surge of raw mana into the stone. The makeshift island expanded forward, forcefully dragging the raft along its jagged surface, narrowly sliding us out of the beast's lethal bite radius. The monster's teeth clamped down on empty salt water. The resulting concussive shockwave knocked me flat against the cold stone. I spat out blood. The creature thrashed blindly, furious at missing its prey, its massive tail whipping the ocean into a boiling frenzy. It circled back, diving deep into the black abyss to build terrifying momentum for a second, undoubtedly fatal breach. The water fell silent. That stillness felt far worse than the roaring. It meant the predator was aiming directly upward from the unseen depths. I stared at my bleeding hands. The system interface stubbornly hovered over my knuckles, flashing that horrifying crimson prompt. Harvest biomass. The magic wanted me to drain the life force of the women huddled behind me to fuel the terraformation. Do something, Eleanor shrieked, clutching the splintering edge of the lifeboat. I have nothing left, I gasped. You just made a rock move. It costs my blood, Eleanor. I coughed, my vision swimming with dark spots. The ocean beneath us began to vibrate. A distinct, sickening hum resonated through the granite platform. The Leviathan was ascending like a fleshy, armored torpedo. For a brief, crushing moment, I accepted our inevitable doom. I closed my eyes, waiting for the massive jaws to shatter our fragile sanctuary and drag us into the freezing dark. We were dead. Then, a desperate survivor lunged forward and grabbed my hand. Her name was Chloe. She pressed her palms against mine, shivering violently in her soaked clothes. A hidden system notification abruptly pinged in my peripheral vision. Voluntary mana transfer initiated. Warmth surged back into my frozen veins, instantly restoring my depleted core to maximum capacity. I didn't need to steal her life force. The system secretly allowed a consensual transfer of magical energy. I slammed both fists fiercely into the granite. A towering pillar of dense basalt violently erupted from the sea floor beneath us. The sudden geological upheaval catapulted our makeshift island 20 feet straight into the air. The Leviathan breached the surface, its gaping, jagged maw missing our rocky ledge by mere inches before crashing heavily back into the churning waves below. We had survived the immediate oceanic assault. I knew why the rock grew. The energy transfer worked perfectly. But why did an ordinary civilian like Chloe possess compatible magical energy in the first place? And more terrifyingly, how many of the other 49 women carried this exact same hidden, volatile spark? Every desperate choice I made on that rising pillar of stone was leading directly to the final necessary whisper. The true power I was looking for wasn't hidden within the sword-like sharpness of the basalt. The elevated platform provided a temporary illusion of safety, but our overall situation remained incredibly grim. We sat stranded on a barren, flat rock pillar in the middle of a violently flooded world. No food, no fresh water. The biting wind howled relentlessly, threatening to sweep the weakest survivors right off the jagged edge. Chloe had collapsed entirely from exhaustion, her face pale and drawn. The mana transfer had nearly stopped her heart. Was it fair to ask the others to sacrifice their physical vitality just to buy us another miserable day? No. Did I have any other logical option? Zero. I needed to aggressively expand the territory, construct windbreaks, and somehow synthesize an aquifer. I slowly approached the huddled, shivering group. The system interface projected a subtle, glowing golden aura around exactly 12 of the 50 women. The compatible ones. Eleanor notably lacked the golden hue, a humiliating fact that visibly infuriated her as I bypassed her completely. I knelt respectfully beside a trembling, tattooed mechanic named Sarah. I explained the grim process clearly, hiding nothing about the excruciating pain she would endure. She hesitated, biting her cracked lip, then nodded firmly. Placing her calloused hands over mine, she initiated the mysterious transfer. A blinding rush of pure, unadulterated energy flooded my biological system. It was too fast. A sharp crack echoed through my forearms. Pain flared, white-hot and paralyzing, radiating straight into my chest. I couldn't breathe. The system's text glowed viciously in my peripheral vision. Mana vessel overload 110%. I didn't need the notification to tell me I was burning up from the inside. I ground my teeth, forcing the volatile magic downward, and slammed my palms into the rock. The stone expanded outward, doubling the surface area of our island. A shallow, bowl-shaped depression formed smoothly in the center, rapidly filling with crystal-clear, magically purified water. The girls stared in stunned, breathless silence. Then, a collective sob of profound relief echoed across the desolate platform as they rushed desperately to drink. We had water. We had space. We had a tiny shred of hope. Sarah slumped against my shoulder, breathing heavily but alive. I carefully laid her down, my own muscles twitching violently from the magical backlash. The immediate crisis was averted. I thought my primary job was simply expanding the rock to keep these women breathing. Then, the system interface unexpectedly updated. A new, ominous timer appeared in the upper right corner of my vision, counting down from 72 hours. The label didn't mention leviathans or starvation. It read continental convergence event. I wasn't just building a pathetic little island. The system was forcing me into a territorial war. But who exactly was I supposed to be fighting in a world entirely swallowed by water? I stared at the floating countdown. The red numbers ticked backward, burning a hole in my patience. I didn't realize it yet, but every desperate expansion of our territory was pushing me closer to that final, necessary whisper. The 12 compatible women gathered nervously around me. We formed a crude, exhausting production line. They channeled their latent energy. I aggressively molded the granite. The flat platform slowly morphed into a jagged, defensive fortress, complete with raised outer walls and a central bunker. My hands bled constantly. The skin peeled away, exposing raw flesh to the biting saltwater. This wasn't just about surviving the hungry ocean anymore. It was about surviving whatever twisted, violent society humanity was rapidly becoming in the flooded dark. The stakes had fundamentally shifted from natural survival to territorial warfare. The physical toll of rapid terraformation remained brutal. Whenever Sarah pushed her volatile magic into my spine, my core muscles seized violently. I gritted my teeth, forcefully commanding the stone upward. We desperately needed a higher vantage point. I molded a crude watchtower from a solid basalt extrusion, fighting the nausea clawing at my throat. Standing weakly at the peak, I finally understood the ominous timer. I spotted a faint, pulsing red anomaly reflecting on the distant horizon. It matched the system's countdown perfectly. I realized the magic interface wasn't tracking a random weather event. It was tracking a deliberate collision course. But if that crimson beacon was a targeted marker, who originally painted it on our exact coordinates, I descended the rough stairs, keeping that terrifying revelation firmly to myself. My stomach violently cramped, dragging my attention back to our most immediate lethal threat. We possessed fresh water and sturdy walls, but 0 calories. The survivors were growing dangerously sluggish, their eyes hollow and unfocused. I needed to hunt immediately. I knelt at the treacherous edge of our rocky sanctuary, attempting to shape the submerged granite into a funnel trap. The intricate stone mesh shattered instantly beneath the crushing ocean currents. My makeshift net dissolved into useless, muddy silt. I cursed bitterly, wiping a stinging mixture of sweat and sea salt from my forehead. Did I know anything about deep-sea engineering? No. Did that stop me from aggressively trying to weaponize a natural reef? Obviously not. I had to adapt quickly or watch them all slowly starve. I changed my hunting tactics entirely. Instead of foolishly fighting the immense oceanic pressure, I decided to exploit it. I carved a shallow tidal pool directly into the outer edge of our platform, leaving a narrow, deceptive entrance open to the churning sea. We waited in agonizing, breathless silence. The freezing wind whipped ruthlessly across our shivering bodies. Finally, a dense school of large, silver-scaled fish swam blindly into the artificial basin, seeking shelter from the deeper predators. I channeled a tiny fraction of my remaining mana and slammed my bleeding fist onto the solid ground. The rock entrance snapped shut. The trapped water drained rapidly through tiny, porous holes I manifested in the stone floor. Dozens of heavy, muscular fish flopped helplessly on the dry granite. A ragged, desperate cheer erupted from the exhausted women. We had captured food. It was a meager, ugly victory, but it felt incredibly like conquering a hostile nation. We completely lacked the means to build a fire, but intense hunger easily murdered our lingering civilized standards. I tossed my cheap pocket knife onto the bloody stone floor, gesturing vaguely at the thrashing catch. "Pass the blade," Eleanor said. I blinked, staring warily at the disgraced billionaire. "You know how to gut a living fish." "I know how to cut things apart," she replied. "Good enough," I said. She knelt in her ruined, salt-stained designer dress, slicing the silvery flesh. The morbid, cold efficiency of her swift movements was profoundly disturbing. We ate the raw meat in savage, grateful silence. The dense protein fueled our severely depleted bodies, slowly pushing back the encroaching shadows of starvation. I sat heavily near the base of the watchtower, chewing a tough strip of flesh, quietly watching the girls finally rest. Some slept huddled tightly together for shared body heat. Others quietly sharpened pieces of broken oyster shell against the rough rocks. The power I was looking for wasn't hidden in the fortified, impenetrable walls we built, but in the hardening, ruthless spirits of these desperate survivors. The glowing countdown suddenly reached its final, singular hour. The surrounding ocean surface grew strangely, terrifyingly calm, resembling a massive sheet of polished black glass. Why was the tide suddenly pulling aggressively away from our fortified island? The water level dropped significantly, exposing the jagged, barnacle-encrusted foundations of our lower walls. A deep, unnatural rumbling vibrated aggressively through the soles of my boots. We had successfully survived the gnawing hunger. We had decisively defeated the Leviathan's brutal assault. We were sitting closely together, bellies comfortably full, genuinely believing we had secured a permanent, untouchable foothold in this drowned hell. For a brief, beautiful moment, I thought we had finally won the precious right to exist quietly. Then the afternoon sun vanished entirely behind a moving mountain. I leaped frantically to my feet, sprinting to the edge of the stone parapet. It wasn't a natural mountain. It was an opposing island, easily 10 times the size of ours, accelerating through the water like an unstoppable dreadnought. Massive, weaponized stone spikes jutted menacingly from its bow. Hundreds of armored, shouting figures stood aggressively along its sprawling ridges. The system interface violently fractured my vision with a blindingly bright crimson warning. demanding an immediate territory assimilation. A sharp, agonizing electrical shock ripped through my chest. Pain flared, white-hot and blinding, dropping me violently to my knees. A terrifying secondary alert burned directly into my mind, declaring my core resonance was being actively challenged. I didn't need the abstract magic to explain the grim situation. The approaching warlord was utilizing the exact same terraforming ability, and he fully intended to consume our tiny sanctuary to feed his own massive, floating empire. The enemy dreadnought slammed ruthlessly into our fragile borders. A deafening crack echoed across the sea. Our defensive basalt walls shattered like cheap glass, sending massive, jagged debris crashing into the carefully carved tidal pool. The rival architect stood triumphantly on his towering stone prow, extending his right hand downward. I felt the granite beneath my boots violently vibrating, rapidly dissolving into useless, muddy sand. He was aggressively draining our foundation to feed his monstrous floating empire. Eleanor screamed in genuine terror, scrambling desperately toward the crumbling inner edge of our sanctuary. I didn't try to frantically rebuild our shattered defenses. Instead, I turned backward. I grabbed Sarah's trembling hand, signaling the other 11 compatible women. They moved instantly, forming a tight circle around me. They linked their arms, violently flooding my frozen veins with an agonizing, overwhelming surge of raw, unadulterated mana. A hidden system notification abruptly pinged in my peripheral vision: critical vessel override. Structural collapse imminent. Pain flared, white-hot and blinding, deep inside my chest. My vision flared completely white, but I refused to let go. I crawled forward, pressing my bleeding forehead directly against the enemy's invading stone spike. I bypassed his crude, aggressive commands, sinking my magical consciousness deep into the microscopic, hidden fault lines of his stolen earth. I whispered a single devastating word: deconstruct. The rival warlord's arrogant grin vanished instantly. His massive, 10-story fortress groaned in catastrophic, unimaginable structural failure. In one breathtaking heartbeat, his entire dreadnought dissolved into fine, gray silt. Hundreds of armored soldiers plunged screaming into the freezing, black ocean. My tiny island aggressively absorbed the falling sediment, rapidly expanding our borders to swallow the enemy's lost territory. I watched the rival architect drown, feeling a grim sense of absolute victory. We had successfully defended our home. But then the collapsing ocean violently displaced the center of his ruined dreadnought. I thought he was just another brutal conqueror seeking mindless expansion. When the muddy water finally cleared, revealing thousands of emaciated, terrified people chained inside submerged iron cages, the horrifying reality crushed my lungs. He wasn't hunting us at all. He was fleeing. He was a desperate refugee running from something terrifyingly huge approaching from the east, and I had just brutally sunk their only transport. I stared blankly at the thousands of drowning captives struggling in the dark waves, realizing the terrifying scale of my new, unwanted responsibility. I finally understood that the earth doesn't belong to the one who simply forces it to rise. It bends to the one willing to bleed into its deepest, most unstable fault lines. And the ultimate weapon of survival isn't building a towering fortress, it's knowing the exact whisper that shatters theirs. I pulled the first shivering captive from the freezing water, noticing a bizarre, glowing crimson brand seared deeply into her pale neck. What exactly marks a human slave with a numeric barcode that perfectly matches my own system interface?